Sabrine's A-Push Project. During the age of Jackson, in the election of 1840, politics had changed so dramatically a two-party system was formed, the two parties being the Democrats and the Whigs. The Jacksonian Democrats glorified liberty of the individuals, meanwhile the Whigs promoted natural harmony of society and the value of community. The great differences of the two parties resulted in sectional political parties. This ultimately brought on issues of slavery. It was in the 1850s the two-party system started issues putting the Union in jeopardy. Bringing on the Jackson Party, democracy, it also brought along working men the will to vote, most of whom were loyal to the Democratic Party, changing politics in the 1820s and 1830s. Within the new voters came with more demands such as 10-hour working days, higher wages, and public education for children. During the age of Jackson, suffrage was extended to most white men. During the age of Jackson, the Jacksonian democracy also demanded elected judges and rewrote many states' constitutions to reflect the values of changing politics. Impact of emerging technologies. The invention of the turnpike had attracted a rich trade to Philadelphia and stimulated westward development. The Lancaster Turnpike had returning as high as 15% annual dividends to its stockholders, impacting the antebellum era positively. The invention of the steamboat positively impacted manufacturing. With this new invention, manufacturers were able to deliver their products in a much faster on rivers like the Mississippi River. The construction of the Erie Canal had also significantly impacted the manufacturing. It linked the Great Lakes with the Hudson River. With this new passageway, the cost of shipping a ton significantly decreased, as well as time of transit. The most significant invention was the railroad. It connected with iron later to steel, enabling the citizens to send their products everywhere in the U.S. The Old South. Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin created a wide scale of cultivation of short-stamped cotton. Cotton soon became the dominant southern crop. This impact being a new southern wealth for Southerners, however, increased the need for slaves during the early antebellum era. With cotton being the new bread buyer, there was a higher demand for cotton. Cotton trade had not only profited south but the north as well. They would transport cotton to England for sterling and needed goods for the U.S. Basically, prosperity was dependent on the slaves' ginning. After the 1840s, cotton was half of the value of Americans' export. Farmers needed more manpower. As a result, they bought more slaves. It was imperative that they had slaves in the 1850s. 1,733 families owned more than 100 slaves each. Due to slaves producing such a valuable crop in the South, the South overwhelmingly powerful. Britain was tied to them with their need for cotton, in which if there was ever a civil war between the North and South, Britain would have no choice but to attack the North, and the South would win. Cotton being a powerful monarch, they needed slaves to gin the cotton. The South relied on slavery as their fuel to power. Religious reforms and cultures. The Second Great Awakening had inspired the people to better improve their society. The Second Great Awakening convinced people to get rid of drinking, which led to the temperance reform movement. People had formed American temperance societies to get rid of drinking, promoting the temperance reform movements. The Second Great Awakening also inspired the abolition reform movement. The the Second Great Awakening had persuaded people to not promote discrimination, which led to anti-slavery societies in the antebellum era. Antebellum era. The Second Great Awakening had also persuaded people in believing against cruelty against humans, which brings the next reform movement, prison reforms. Reformers like Dorothea Dix advocated for improved conditions in prisons. The impact, an important factor in the Second Great Awakening is the feminization of religion in both church membership and the theology. It led to women's rights reform movements. Manifest Destiny. During the antebellum era, Texas had become the 28th state in the U.S. It had led the Texas annexion, followed by a war with Mexico. They had also gained California. The new territory had resulted in the California Gold Rush, which led to thousands of people moving to California in search of gold. During the antebellum era, the U.S. had also acquired New Mexico. This also led to Texas threatening to descend upon Santa and seize New Mexico. Utah was also acquired in the antebellum era. Like New Mexico, it had also admissions as a non-slave state, which led to agitations from the South to the North for the abolition of slavery. Afterwards, led to the Compromise of 1850. Slavery and sectional tensions. The Compromise of 1850 admitted California as a free state. It also abolished the slave trade in District Columbia. The admission California as a free state had also unbalanced the free states and slave states, upsetting the South. Not only that, but the abolition of slave trade, which is why it only stalled the Civil War. The Compromise of 1850 had also added more stringent fugitive slave laws, more stringent fugitive slave law, going beyond that of 1793. The fugitive slave law angered the North, that runaways could not testify on their own behalf and were denied trial. Although the compromise did to some extent satisfy both North and South, it did more to dissatisfy them, which is why this compromise had only stalled the Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act proposed that the issue of slavery be decided by popular sovereignty in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, territories thus revoking the 1820 Compromise. This shows that compromise after compromise, there's always a problem with, which is why it only stalled the Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had also repealed the 1820 Compromise. Both North and South saw less and less they could live with. The Democrats were broken due to this act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had only pushed us closer to the Civil War. Steps to succession. The beatdown of Sumner was one of the first physical conflicts between the North and the South. The beatdown of Sumner was an attack with a cane by Preston Brooke on Sumner for apparently insulting Brooke's uncle, Senator Andrew Butler. It displayed Southerners' ruthlessness in defending slavery, showing the Civil War was inevitable. During the election of 1856, the South had no power in the U.S. It was fortunate that the South had not seceded the Union right then and there. The election of 1856 had foreshadowed the Civil War in 1860. Harper's Ferry was an arsenal in Virginia seized by abolitionist John Brown in 1859. Brown had murdered 7 innocent people. He was later executed when he was captured. Brown's raid openly convinced the Southerners that all Northerners were just as extreme as him, pushing the South towards succeeding the Union. The election of 1860 was the last straw for the South, when Lincoln won the election with the full intention of stopping slavery altogether. It pushed South Carolina to secede from the Union along with 10 other states. The Civil War. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all states in the states to be free. However, it did not affect the slavery in non-rebelling states. The 13th Amendment prohibited all forms of slaves in order for the South to get re-entry of the Union. They must ratify the amendment. The Gettysburg Address is a speech spoken by Lincoln, which was delivered at the cemetery of the Gettysburg battlefield. This is where Lincoln framed the war as a means of upholding the values of liberty, expanding the goals during the Union goals during the war. The Sherman's March was a military march of destruction through Georgia. Its purpose was to fracture and destroy civilian property, to diminish morals, and undercut the Confederate war effort. Reconstruction. Now that blacks were granted freedom, many of them left their owners' property in search of families and friends that were sold off. Along with freed blacks were also given the right to learn to read and write, so their children may have a brighter future. After the Civil War, the Reconstruction Act was passed. It divided the South into 5 military districts, disenfranchising former Confederates, and forced the South to ratify the 14th Amendment. It shows that at this point in time, the South had little to no power whatsoever. However, since President Johnson's Reconstruction policies were lenient, they did pass black codes, laws passed in the South to restrict the rights of emancipated blacks, particularly with respect to negotiating labor contracts. And I'm done. I'm so sorry for not being able to speak on a microphone properly. Please enjoy this horrible project. Thank you.